use that as a guidebook for life. Now, this is crazy. Why was the Book of Enoch removed from the Bible?
Hidden for centuries and rediscovered in the 17th century, the Book of Enoch unveiled secrets so disturbing, the early church banned it.
But then faded from sight. Nobody republished it. It disappeared until the Book of Enoch was rediscovered in the Ethiopian region of Abyssinia in the 1700s.
Filled with stories of fallen angels and forbidden knowledge, it terrified priests, haunted scholars, and changed everyone who dared to read it. Some chased its mysteries and never came back the same. Now, Joe Rogan is bringing it back into the spotlight. What did this ancient book reveal? And why was it buried for 2,000 years? Join us as we unravel the terrifying truth. What ancient text holds terrifying secrets about humanity? We've read the Bible for centuries, but what if we've missed something? Something buried for 2,000 years that's only now coming to light, and it changes everything. The Book of Enoch has been hiding in plain sight, and it's at the heart of this terrifying revelation about the human race. Though almost forgotten, this ancient text has sparked intense debate, especially after Joe Rogan brought it to light in several podcast episodes.
Needs to be taken into account if we're claiming to have a full knowledge of the past of humanity. And so I'm just really glad that Netflix.
The Book of Enoch is not part of most modern Bibles, but that doesn't mean it wasn't important. Also called the First Book of Enoch, this text was likely written between 300 and 100 BCE by Jewish thinkers. It claims to be the work of Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. Scholars believe it was labeled under his name to give it more weight and authority. Early Jewish and Christian groups read and shared it widely, but it was never added to the official Bible. Instead, it survived mainly in Ethiopia, where the Ethiopian Orthodox Church still accepts it as sacred and has preserved it in the ancient Ge'ez language. The text stayed hidden from most of the world for centuries, until 1773. That year, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce traveled deep into Ethiopia and returned with 3 copies of the Book of Enoch. This moment marked the book's re-entry into Western knowledge. But the discovery didn't stop there. In the mid-20th century, archaeologists found fragments of the same book among the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Archaeological discoveries of the past century, if not of all time, occurred in 1947.
These pieces were written in Aramaic and date back to the 2nd century BCE, confirming how far back the text really goes. What makes the Book of Enoch so different and so unsettling is the content. It tells of fallen angels who defied God, shared forbidden knowledge with humans, and created chaos on earth. It also describes strange visions of heaven, punishment for the wicked, and a final judgment. Unlike the short mention of Enoch in the book of Genesis, this version turns his life into a dramatic journey filled with supernatural events and warnings. Some believe these stories were too bold for the early church, which may be why they left it out of the Bible. Joe Rogan and other guests on his show, like Graham Hancock, often bring up the Book of Enoch as a lost key to understanding our past. Rogan has said it changes how we view human history and questions the version we've been taught. While scholars remind us that calling it pseudepigraphical doesn't mean it's false, many wonder if the church hid it because it revealed too much. But this mysterious book didn't just reappear by accident. Who risked everything to bring it back from the shadows? And why? James Bruce and the Quest for Enoch. In a time when Europe thought it had mapped the world and mastered its truths, one Scottish explorer dared to go beyond the edge of the known, returning not with gold or glory, but with a forbidden scripture that rattled the gates of religious authority. Bruce's journey wasn't just about exploration. It was about uncovering something the world had forgotten, something powerful enough to shake religious foundations and rewrite ancient truths. James Bruce was born in Scotland in 1730. Unlike most explorers of his time, he wasn't only driven by adventure. He was a well-educated man with a deep interest in ancient cultures, languages, and hidden texts. In 1768, he set off on a dangerous mission to Africa. Officially, his goal was to locate the source of the Blue Nile, but many believe he had a second, deeper purpose: to find lost religious texts that had been ignored or rejected by Western churches. His journey took him through deserts, jungles, and unfamiliar lands. Bruce faced harsh climates, illness, and constant risk. Eventually, he arrived in Ethiopia, a country long cut off from Europe by both geography and religion. Ethiopia had preserved a unique collection of religious writings, including the Book of Enoch, which remained part of its sacred scripture even as it vanished elsewhere. In 1773, Bruce finally found what he had come for. Inside a monastery in the Ethiopian city of Gondar, he discovered the Book of Enoch written in Ge'ez, the country's ancient language. This was no ordinary religious text. It spoke of angels who defied God, shared forbidden knowledge with humans, and reshaped history. It hinted that human progress wasn't sparked by divine blessing, but by heavenly rebellion. These were not the kinds of ideas the early church wanted to be spread through Europe. Bruce returned home with several copies of the manuscript, but rather than being celebrated, he was met with doubt. Many dismissed his claims or ignored them entirely. It wasn't until decades later that scholars realized the value of what he had uncovered. Still, Bruce had opened the door. Joe Rogan often brings up Bruce's mission as a story of defiance. To him, Bruce wasn't just an explorer. He was someone brave enough to challenge institutions that wanted to keep secrets buried. Rogan has said Bruce's find is like discovering a real-life conspiracy hidden in plain sight for thousands of years.
Plenty of evidence that there were many sites like this that were thought to be just legend and myth.
Bruce's discovery brought Enoch back into the conversation, but the book's mysteries didn't stop there. Decades later, in a desert cave near the Dead Sea, another discovery would confirm its ancient power.
Finding the Dead Sea Scrolls marked a significant leap forward in the history of the Bible.
The Dead Sea Scrolls connection.
They helped to provide evidence and insights into the life of a Jewish community that lived around the time of Jesus.
When those jars shattered open in 1946, so did the silence around one of history's most controversial texts, the Book of Enoch. If the Book of Enoch truly holds terrifying truths about the human race, then the Dead Sea Scrolls offered undeniable proof that those truths were once taken seriously, and not just by fringe groups. Nearly 2,000 years after it was written, this forbidden book resurfaced in the most unexpected way, inside a hidden cave in the Judean desert. In 1946, a group of Bedouin shepherds made a startling discovery near Qumran, along the northwest edge of the Dead Sea. While searching for a lost goat, one shepherd tossed a rock into a cave and heard the sound of breaking pottery. Curious, he entered the cave and found clay jars containing old scrolls made of leather and papyrus. These were no ordinary texts. They would come to be known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Among these ancient writings were fragments written in Aramaic that matched parts of the Book of Enoch. These pieces date back to the 2nd century BCE. This proved that the Book of Enoch wasn't a strange, isolated text preserved only in Ethiopia. Instead, it had been part of Jewish religious life long before Christianity took shape. Scholars believe a group known as the Essenes, who followed strict and apocalyptic beliefs, wrote and hid the scrolls to protect them during the Roman invasion. This changed everything. Until then, many dismissed the Ethiopian version James Bruce had found as a later invention or religious oddity. But the scrolls confirmed that Enoch's stories about angels who disobeyed God, brought forbidden knowledge to humans, and sparked cosmic judgment, had deep roots in ancient Judaism. These were not forgotten legends. They were once considered sacred. Joe Rogan often highlights this connection on his podcast. To him, the fact that these scrolls were buried speaks volumes. They didn't just throw them away, they hid them, he said, suggesting that religious authorities may have wanted to keep certain ideas buried. The scrolls, in his view, expose a long effort to suppress texts that didn't fit the official version of history. Academic researchers take a different tone. They focus on how the scrolls show the wide variety of beliefs that once existed in the ancient world. Enoch's influence is clear in many apocalyptic writings, and his ideas seem to have shaped early Christian thinking as well. Now that we know the Book of Enoch was once central to religious thought, one question remains: what was in it that made people want to hide it? The Watchers, angels who defied God. If there's one part of the Book of Enoch that truly rattles the foundations of traditional religion, It's the story of the Watchers, angels who broke the rules and dragged humanity into chaos. This story, buried for centuries, reveals a side of ancient scripture that is as shocking today as it was then. Even Joe Rogan calls it one of the wildest parts of the book. According to the first Enoch chapters 6 and 7, the Watchers were a group of 200 angels assigned by God to observe Earth. Their job was simple: watch, but don't interfere. These angels, known as the Sons of Heaven, had great knowledge but were forbidden from sharing it with humans. They were supposed to remain distant, acting as divine witnesses rather than participants. But everything changed when they began to desire human women. Led by an angel named Samyaza, the Watchers made a secret pact. They agreed that if one of them acted, all would follow. Together, they descended to Earth and took human wives, defying God's command in the process. Their rebellion didn't stop at marriage. In the first Enoch chapter 8, the text describes how they taught humanity hidden knowledge, skills that were never meant for mortals. These included astrology, magic, weapon making, metalworking, and the use of herbs. At first glance, these teachings might seem like helpful tools, but Enoch suggests they led to rapid moral decay. Violence increased, corruption spread, and society began to fall apart. This wasn't just about angels falling in love. The Watchers gave humanity power it wasn't ready to handle. The story paints a world where the lines between divine order and human ambition were blurred, and the result was disaster. On the Joe Rogan Experience, this story sparks bold ideas. Rogan often wonders if the Watchers were not angels at all, but ancient aliens. Maybe they were advanced beings, dropping forbidden tech into early civilization, he said. He compares the tale to the Greek myth of Prometheus, who gave fire to humans and paid the price. While this theory excites many, scholars take a more symbolic approach. They suggest the Watchers reflect Jewish fears during the Hellenistic era, when foreign cultures and ideas were flooding into Judea. The forbidden knowledge could represent unwanted outside influence, tools and practices that changed traditional life too quickly. No matter how you interpret it, the story of the Watchers is one of crossing lines. Divine beings made a choice, and that choice brought real consequences. They changed the world, and not for the better. The Nephilim, giants of chaos. It wasn't just the Watchers' fall that shook the heavens, it was also their children, the Nephilim, who brought the earth to its knees. These towering hybrids, born from a forbidden union between angels and humans, became the darkest consequence of divine rebellion.
These were actually the sons and daughters of fallen angels. You see, these Nephilim actually have an origin story.
According to Enoch, chapter 7, the Nephilim were massive, terrifying beings who knew no limits. These part angel, part human creatures had a hunger that couldn't be satisfied. At first, they consumed the earth's crops and livestock. When those ran out, they turned on people, devouring humans in their desperate quest for more. Their size and strength made them unstoppable, and their violence turned once thriving lands into blood-soaked war zones. The Book of Enoch describes this destruction in vivid detail. The Nephilim, driven by rage and desire, even began fighting each other, spreading chaos wherever they roamed. What began as a single act of disobedience, angels taking human wives, now threatens all life on earth. The Bible briefly echoes this story in Genesis chapter 6 from verses 1 to 4, calling the Nephilim heroes of old, men of renown. But where Genesis hints, Enoch delivers a full-blown nightmare. These were not noble warriors, they were monsters. Their very existence broke the natural order, and their actions escalated the world's decline. Joe Rogan finds this story too strange to ignore. On his podcast, he speculated that the Nephilim might be the explanation behind the reports of giant skeletons found in remote places. It's like these things were genetic experiments gone wrong, he once said. While this theory fascinates fans of the unknown, scholars offer a different take. Many believe the Nephilim represent real-world fears of unchecked power, cultural mixing, and moral decay during ancient times. Rather than actual giants, they could symbolize corrupt leaders who ruled with cruelty and crushed the weak. Still, the imagery in Enoch is hard to ignore. Massive beings battling across the land, villages torn apart, people living in fear of creatures they could not stop. It's the kind of story that feels more like myth than scripture, yet its warnings remain clear. The Nephilim were not just destroyers of bodies, they shattered the spiritual balance. Their presence was a sign that the world had strayed too far. Their violence echoed the forbidden knowledge shared by their angelic fathers, deepening humanity's fall from grace. The earth was now drowning in sin, and something had to give way. The Great Flood and Divine Judgment. When the world was drowning in chaos, corrupted by fallen angels and terrorized by the Nephilim, God's patience finally ran out. The destruction these beings caused wasn't just physical, it shattered the balance of the world. In Joe Rogan's words, this moment was a cosmic reset button, where the universe had to wipe the slate clean before it tore itself apart. In Enoch chapter 10, God responds to this disaster with a clear decision. The earth must be cleansed. The solution is swift, merciless, and total. A flood unlike anything the world had ever seen. It is darker and more direct, describing not just the washing away of sin, but the removal of monsters and fallen beings that no longer belonged. God sends the archangel Uriel to warn Noah, son of Lamech. He is told to build an ark and prepare for a coming storm that will destroy everything else. Noah is chosen not only because he is righteous, but because his bloodline must survive. The world will restart through him. The flood is described not as a natural disaster, but as divine judgment. A reset meant to end both the physical violence and the spiritual corruption caused by the Watchers and their offspring. The punishment for the Watchers is even more severe. God commands Raphael, another archangel, to bind Azazel, the angel who taught humanity how to fight, lie, and destroy. Azazel was thrown into a place called Dudael, a dark and empty wasteland where he will remain until the final judgment. The other Watchers are stripped of their power and condemned to wander the earth as spirits, no longer angels, but something twisted, what some would call demons. Their eternal punishment stands as a warning to any who would rebel against the divine order. Joe Rogan has shared his fascination with this version of the flood on his podcast, saying it might explain why ancient cultures around the world have similar flood myths. He wonders aloud, what if this wasn't just a story, but a record of a real global wipeout? Some scientists connect these stories to real events, such as the flooding of the Black Sea around 5600 BCE. While no hard evidence proves a worldwide flood, the Book of Enoch's version is unmatched in its scale and intent. The flood marks a turning point. The Nephilim are gone, the Watchers are judged, and humanity begins again. But one figure still has more to see. Enoch's journey is far from over. Enoch's heavenly visions. After the flood wiped the earth clean, something extraordinary happened. Not on earth, but in the skies above. Enoch, the man who had walked with God, was suddenly taken into the heavens. This moment marks one of the wildest parts of his story. According to Enoch, chapters 14 through 36, it was a journey into the very heart of the universe. God summons Enoch into heaven, not just to observe, but to learn. Swept up in divine whirlwinds, Enoch is shown the inner workings of creation. He sees the throne of God, surrounded by legions of angels, glowing with power and light. He visits the places where stars are stored, where winds are kept, and where thunder and lightning await their command. Everything had a purpose, and Enoch is there to understand it all. These visions don't stop at the physical world. Enoch also sees the future, a final judgment where the wicked are punished and the righteous find peace. The language is bold and full of symbolic detail, with fire, angels, and cosmic battles filling the scene. It paints a world ruled not by chance but by divine justice, where every action has consequences. Enoch's journey doesn't stand alone. It mirrors the later biblical books of Daniel and Revelation, which also describe heavenly courts and visions of the end times. This has led many scholars to believe that the Book of Enoch helped shape those texts, even though it was never added to the Western Bible. In contrast to Genesis chapter 5 verse 24, where Enoch simply walked with God, the Book of Enoch makes him a central figure, a divine messenger and record keeper. He becomes the one trusted to witness and write down truths too powerful for most humans to see. While some see that as a myth or a metaphor, others think it reflects real questions humans have always asked. Who runs the universe? What happens after death? Is there a plan? Whether symbolic or not, Enoch's visions are massive in scope. They cover the movement of stars, the fate of souls, and the workings of heaven. This blend of awe and judgment made the book too controversial for early church leaders, yet it remains one of the boldest religious texts ever written. Through it, Enoch becomes more than a prophet. He becomes a link between humanity and the divine. Enoch, prophet or mythical hero? Was Enoch a just man who touched the divine, or a symbol shaped by ancient imagination? This is one of the biggest mysteries at the heart of the Book of Enoch. As the story unfolds, Enoch's role becomes more than just a messenger. He transforms into a figure of deep power and celestial importance, someone Joe Rogan calls the OG whistleblower, revealing truths the world wasn't ready to hear. The Bible gives us only a short glimpse of Enoch. In Genesis chapter 5 verse 24, it says he walked with God and was taken, skipping death entirely. That single line sparked centuries of questions. Who was this man? Why did God take him? The Book of Enoch fills in those gaps with rich and dramatic detail. In the Book of Enoch and later texts like the third Book of Enoch, Enoch isn't just a good man, he's a celestial scribe. He writes down God's secrets, judges fallen angels, and becomes a divine figure known as Metatron. This version of Enoch isn't passive. He's bold, wise, and deeply trusted by the divine. His journey makes him a link between the human and heavenly worlds. Scholars continue to debate who or what Enoch really was. Some argue he's a legendary version of a real person, someone remembered for his wisdom and devotion. Others believe he's a myth built to offer hope during hard times, a symbol of knowledge and justice. Comparisons have even been made to Thoth, the ancient Egyptian god of wisdom, showing how Enoch fits into a broader pattern of spiritual figures across cultures. In Ethiopia, where the Book of Enoch is still part of the Bible, he's more than a legend. He's a spiritual hero. His journey to heaven isn't just symbolic, it's proof of divine approval. For people who believe in him, Enoch's story is one of great hope and purpose. Joe Rogan finds this part of Enoch's tale especially compelling. To him, Enoch sounds like a truth teller who pulled back the curtain on a hidden world. In a time when many people feel distrustful of big systems, that idea hits home. Enoch becomes a voice for those seeking deeper meaning in a chaotic world. What makes Enoch so fascinating is this mix, part prophet, part mythical hero. He isn't just telling people what God said, he's part of the story, involved in the divine plan, and trusted with knowledge meant to last through the ages. Whether you believe he was real or symbolic, his story continues to inspire questions about humanity's place in the universe. The 5 books of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is not just one story, it's an entire collection of ancient revelations, each adding a new layer to its cosmic vision. This text is a compilation of 5 books that offer everything from apocalyptic prophecies to cosmic secrets, all stitched together into one grand narrative. Known collectively as the Ethiopic Book of Enoch, these 5 sections were likely put together between 300 and 100 BCE and span 108 chapters, filled with angels, visions, and divine mysteries. The heart of the Book of Enoch is the Book of Watchers.
The Book of Enoch is perhaps the most controversial book that didn't make it into the Christian Bible,
which covers chapters 1 to 36. It tells the story of the Watchers, angels who descend to earth, rebel, and father the Nephilim. This section also includes Enoch's dramatic ascent to the heavens, where he witnesses divine judgment being carried out. It sets a dark, urgent tone that flows through the rest of the text. Next is the Book of Parables, from chapters 37 to 71, which takes a turn into prophecy. It describes a coming judgment led by a righteous one, who has sparked debate among scholars. While some see this figure as a precursor to messianic ideas, others argue it's more closely linked to Noah and the flood rather than to a future Christian Messiah. Following closely is the Astronomical Book, covering chapters 72 to 82. It takes a deep dive into the stars, It focuses on celestial mechanics and presents a 364-day solar calendar, which was crucial to the Qumran community. This calendar was seen as divinely ordained for proper worship. The Book of Dream Visions, from chapters 83 to 90, is where history is retold through allegory, with humans depicted as animals, Israel as sheep, their enemies as wolves. The section climaxes with another vision of the flood, reinforcing the theme of God's justice. Finally, the Epistles of Enoch span from chapters 91 to 108. It rounds out the collection with moral teachings and the story of Noah's miraculous birth. In this narrative, Noah is born as a radiant speaking child, a clear sign of his divine destiny. Joe Rogan can't help but marvel at this wide variety of topics, saying, "It's like ancient geeks mapping the stars in history in one epic saga, way ahead of its time." Scholars agree, noting the importance of the astronomical book at Qumran, where its calendar shaped religious practices. However, there's still debate about when the Book of Parables was written, with some arguing it could date as late as the 1st century CE. This collection of mythology, science, and ethics makes the Book of Enoch a rare window into ancient Jewish thought, challenging and expanding upon the scriptures of its time. Each book builds on the others, creating a dense shade of forbidden knowledge. Why was the Book of Enoch banned? At a time when church councils were deciding which texts would define the soul of Christianity, one ancient book was quietly locked out, not because it lacked power, but because it had too much. Why was the Book of Enoch excluded from the Bible, despite its gripping stories of fallen angels, divine judgment, and cosmic visions? This question has intrigued scholars and captivated figures like Joe Rogan. When the Council of Laodicea established the biblical canon in the 4th century CE, Enoch was left out. But why? The reasons go beyond simple preference. The most significant issue was the book's authorship. Enoch, a figure from the Old Testament, is said to have written the text, but scholars agree it was written much later by unknown authors. This raised doubts about its authenticity and divine inspiration. The church was focused on texts tied directly to prophets or apostles, so a book that wasn't directly connected to these figures was seen as suspicious. But it wasn't just the authorship that troubled the church. The themes in the Book of Enoch were radical for its time. Stories of angels interacting with humans, sharing forbidden knowledge, and causing chaos went against the church's teachings. These themes hinted at a deeper, perhaps more dangerous understanding of the universe, one that could challenge the idea of God's absolute control. The church needed to maintain authority and control over spiritual teachings, so texts that risked undermining that power were kept out. The book's apocalyptic tone also alarmed early church fathers. It depicted cosmic battles and divine judgment in ways that seemed to promote mystical ideas rather than solid moral teachings. The fantastical imagery, like the Nephilim and the Watchers, was seen as too extreme, possibly leading to heretical interpretations. The church preferred texts that focused on Jesus Christ's life and message, rather than speculative stories that didn't seem to align with the Gospels. Despite its exclusion in the Western Bible, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept the Book of Enoch as part of its canon. In Ethiopia, the text was seen as valuable and spiritually important, preserved in the ancient language of Ge'ez. This kept Enoch alive in places outside of Rome's influence, showing how different regions valued the book for its own reasons. This split highlights the political and cultural forces at play when early Christians decided which books would shape the faith. Joe Rogan, who often discusses the book on his podcast.
Now this is crazy. Why was the Book of Enoch removed from the Bible?
Believes that Enoch was banned because it revealed truths they couldn't control. He sees its exclusion as a form of censorship. Scholars, however, argue there were more practical reasons, such as the book's complex cosmology and its origins outside of Hebrew tradition. Today, the Book of Enoch is experiencing a revival. Its themes attract New Age thinkers, conspiracy theorists, and anyone curious about hidden knowledge. Its exclusion from the Bible only adds to its allure, making us wonder what other truths might have been kept hidden. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.